It is October 19th, Friday, and I am making this video to explain what happened with the granite, what we were asking for, and what went wrong. Looking at this diagram that I've made, the tan color boxes that you see are the cabinets, and the black lines are the granite, how we had it originally. The cabinets were going to be 3/4 of an inch longer than the granite, or than the cabinets used to be, which had an overhang. So our original plan was to take this section of granite here that's selected, separate it at this seam, and it was going to be pushed over like so to cover that gap. Everything would remain square and up against the corner, except for now this section here would have a gap, but it's still square. There's no difference in overhang throughout the cabinets, and the backsplash would cover that gap. When I talked to Jessica, I explained that, and I explained that this section here is now going to have a rough edge and would have to be rounded. And she explained to me that's no problem. They can separate it, they can slide it over and install it, and then they would round it off in place at the home. So that was our original plan. Sliding down here, this diagram shows what the installers decided to do. First, when we discussed things, we thought that that would be okay, but it was the simpler solution that they had come up with. Instead of breaking this seam here, they installed it at an angle, so they turned it this way. From first appearance, everything looked like it was fine. The first thing that I had noticed when the guys left is this gap here at the top obviously pushes the corner here, and when it pushes that, there was about an inch, a little bit less than an inch overhang. So that way the granite stuck past the stove on that side, whereas the piece of granite that sits here was installed correctly and square, and there was no extra overhang. In order to, with that, there was also, I'm using the mouse now, there was also the extra overhang here compared to here, and then there was extra overhang on this section compared to over here. So the entire L shape was not separated and was installed crooked. When I called and explained it, Ivan came to the house. He looked at this and said, yes, it was installed incorrectly. Yes, it's at an angle, and we will fix it. So the goal was to, again, straighten things back out, bring it so this gap here was no longer in existence, this gap here wasn't in existence, and then slide just this top piece over. The guys separated the seam here, but they left this section, which is the sink section, in place crooked. And their solution was to take the upper piece, or the stove piece, and cut an angle here and cut an angle here. That allowed them to take the granite, I'm going to slide it over into place where it's supposed to be. So that allowed them to rotate this piece of granite, leave the sink granite in place, even though it needed to be moved and corrected and was still crooked, and turn it. When they turned it, now this bottom seam matches nice and tight, but if we get rid of the red piece here, you can see how there is an overhang here where it's the 30 inches from here to here. So that piece is actually slid over to the left and sits there. So our corner here sits where it's supposed to, but then now there's an angle going this way because they rotated it. So that's where our issue is now, next to the stove. I'm going to give you guys a visual of the stove installed with the granite in a second. And then the other issue is the piece down here the piece that the sink is attached to still has not moved. There's still a gap there, and it still is an issue. So now that you guys kind of see visually, I'm going to go over to the granite and show you where things were and where things are now. I have slid the piece of granite to where it was originally, to where it was tight on this wall. There was a gap back here, but remember that back wall's been cut to turn it the way that they were hoping, and there was overhang here. When that sat, you have your 90-degree here. It's touching here, but they cut a triangle like you saw in the diagram. So they cut a triangle in order to rotate the granite this way. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rotate it and show you how they left the granite and how they were planning on having it installed permanently. So I now have the granite sitting how it sat when they originally left. You can see this side is nice and square. I actually have the stove slightly turned this way. They had recommended to put the stove in crooked in order to split the gap, but the cabinet is square, so it does not allow the stove to turn any further. But even how it sits, there's no gap here, and there's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe about 1/8 of an inch gap there. Now if we go to the other side, it's nice and tight here. There's a 30-inch space from here to here, as they're supposed to be, but that turns into a 30 3/4 inch gap in the back. So it's at an angle separating, and if you look down, you can actually see the top of the cabinet installed there. That is with this piece turned. So now there's a nice flush line here, but it does not work there. The other issue is with it turned, this is now a bigger gap than the backsplash is. So that will not work, and the guy said they didn't think about that, and they're not sure how to fix that solution. Obviously caulking would be the solution there, but with everything else going on, that still doesn't work. Now, on top of the fact that there's an angle here, and it's crooked, and it's not installed correctly, there's also the problem with this piece of granite. It has a gap there. So that gap should have been pushed against the wall. When it pushed it against the wall and squared everything up, the entire granite would slide over. Currently, we have an overhang here, whereas originally, when we had this piece of granite installed in this corner, the granite ended here, before the corner. So when they originally got here, they took the entire L shape, me and them two together, slid it into that back corner. So we lifted it up, we put it on, and we slid it in. It was square along this wall, it was square along the back wall, but because the cabinet was longer, there was that 3/4 inch gap. So again, the plan originally was separate this seam, slide this piece over, keep it square against the wall, keep this one square against the wall. There would only be a gap there. They would be 3/4 of an inch and be square, and then install the backsplash. Because they didn't originally do that, we now have this issue. When they came back the second time, they should have separated this seam, slid this one back where it's supposed to be, slid this one over, and then reinstalled everything. I told them, do not cut this. There is no reason to cut this. It needs to sit square. He said that he had to go clean it up and make it nice and smooth and straight. I could not communicate with him because he doesn't speak English. I don't speak Spanish. But I explained to him, do not cut it. It is square. I told him that this piece needs to be moved. Whether he understood me or not, they did not move the sink cabinet or granite. The sink granite is still crooked. They cut this line, they cut it at a triangle to spin this piece, but now this does not work. That piece doesn't work. That piece doesn't work. So I don't know what else to say. Everything was installed incorrectly. I tried to explain how to fix it and asked you guys to come back, and then it was cut, and now it cannot be saved. If it was something that could be turned or manipulated, it'd be one thing, but we need this to be a square line. We need this piece here to be pushed back against the wall. If you look at the overhang here, obviously a tape measure is better. I have the pictures that I sent you, but we're a 1/4 inch difference in overhang, and the stove needs to be installed straight. Hope that video kind of explains what happened, and I hope we can work something out. But if there's any questions, please call me.